Hey guys, I hope you're all well and looking after yourselves and you're looking after your families. By now, you've probably had a few online lessons and you've got your head around how things work and how they look and what's involved. If you do have any questions or if you still have any questions, make sure that you're seeking advice from your teachers and asking the right questions to get your head around things. Today, we'll be looking at persuasive writing. So I guess we should start this lesson with the question, why do we study persuasive writing? And I guess there are a number of reasons why we do, but I believe there's probably two really important factors that we need to consider. The first being that we are bombarded by countless amounts of media. We have news corporations that write newspapers, we have social media, YouTube, different advertisements. Everything that we read or see has a point of view, and they're trying to get us to agree with them. So it's really important that we understand and reflect how they achieve that, and that we can be prepared to either dismiss it as untrue or biased, or we can agree and say that information is really true to us. And the second reason behind why we study persuasive writing is to improve our own skills, so that if we're required to provide our own point of view, either in writing or spoken, that we can try and use these techniques that we learn to get our audience to agree with us. So, what are the persuasive techniques that we'll be using at year 8, and what do we already know from year 7? So, a reminder that the use of persuasive techniques are used to enhance the writer's contention or the writer's point of view. Contention means writer's point of view. It's different to intention, which means the intent of the author or what the author wants the reader to think or to do. So, persuasive techniques are used to enhance the writer's contention and persuade the reader to accept the line of argument being put forward. So some of the persuasive devices that appeal to the reader's reason, values, or emotions include, and what we've already studied in year 7, alliteration, evidence, generalization, hyperboles, inclusive language, repetition, and rhetorical questions. What we'll be looking at probably in more detail are the persuasive techniques on the right. So in year 8, we'll be looking at figurative language, so metaphors and similes, evidence such as anecdotes and case studies, humour such as puns or irony, emotive language, cliches, and attacks. So probably you've got a bit of a handle on most of these already, but we're going to look into them. We're going to refresh the year 7 ones now, and then we're going to look at the year 8 persuasive techniques. So the first persuasive technique we'll look at, and I will mention the fact that you probably will know some of these persuasive techniques already and remember them from last year when you learnt them in year 7, but I'm hoping that this will just be a bit of a refresher for you. So alliteration is the repeated sound often used at the beginning of words. So the example on the screen is dirty deeds done dirt cheap, which is repeating the sound "d". It's catchy and memorable, and you often see this persuasive technique as a headline in a newspaper article. An example of that might be for the coronavirus. Cooperation is critical to COVID cure. The repetition of the k sound to really draw the audience in and make the point that for us to find a cure, for us to get over these restrictions, we all need to work together. So cooperation is that point that we're reiterating. Evidence can be presented as statistics, facts, or experts' opinions. They are used to support the writer's contention or point of view. They're often used to sway the reader to believe that something is true or can't be argued against. They've got an example there. Researcher Dr. Colin Bell from Deakin University obviously has some prerequisites to provide her point of view. And if we trust her as a researcher or a doctor, then we're obviously going to trust what she has to say to be true. Another example with our current climate is the chief medical expert that the Prime Minister uses to provide information about the coronavirus. The things that come out of the chief medical expert's mouth, we often believe because he's an expert. Generalizations. Now, these need to be analysed really closely because generalizations are sweeping statements that claim something is true for most or all people because it's true for one. So, a generalization can be persuasive because they're tapping into stereotypes or prejudices that a lot of people believe that might not necessarily be true. So, the example, the youth of today are irresponsible, selfish, and lazy, makes an assumption that all young people are irresponsible or selfish. A newspaper or an author might use a generalization when a particular or small part of society might be behaving in a particular way, and they want to make a really large statement that gets the reader's attention by generalizing and assuming that all of those people are the same. And that, as I said before, as a reader, all generalizations need to be really closely analysed and questioned because sometimes they're not always true, but they're used regardless to try and persuade the reader. Hyperbole, so pronounced hyperbole, is an exaggeration or an overstatement. It's used to over dramatize something. Um, we use these all the time. Actually, we probably use them even before we realize we use them. So, for instance, I probably would have said something along these lines over the holidays. If I don't get out of the house, I'm going to go insane. So we use hyperboles to stir up people's emotions and to create a sense of fear or exaggeration. So inclusive language is the use of words such as we, us, or our. Really tries, or when an author uses inclusive language, they're really trying to inspire the audience or their audience to get involved and share the view of a wider community or group. So Dan Andrews, the Victorian Premier, has probably used quite a lot of inclusive language over the past few few weeks to try and inspire Victorians to come together and to behave in a particular way, and also to suggest that if you're not doing what I've asked you to do, you are the minority. So you can see the example up on the screen is we should all do our bit to keep our town clean and litter free. It is up to each and every one of us to do our bit and dispose of rubbish thoughtfully. So you can see that type of language is trying to spur the reader on to agree with the wider community's point of view. So repetition is pretty straightforward. I'm pretty sure we'd all have a decent understanding of what the term repetition means. Um, it's the repeated use of words, phrases, or ideas. It doesn't need to specifically be words. It can be the repetition of concepts or ideas that the author might have. So the example on the screen, I think it uses words. It says there is not enough funding for education, not enough money spent on health, and not enough done for the unemployed. It is time to tell this government that enough is enough. So I'll let you have a guess what the repeated word is. It's clearly enough. So the reader or the writer of this piece of writing is obviously sick and tired of the government. Doesn't think that the government is doing enough to help with education or health. Definitely not. They're not doing enough for people becoming employed as well. So they've used the phrase or the term "not enough" over and over and over again to really drive the point that the government should be doing more to help people in society. So rhetorical questions, as I'm sure you're aware, are questions that have no answer. They're purely used to reiterate or reinforce a point, and for the author to try and get the reader to stop and think about a particular issue. So the example on the screen again, time and time again, the minister has lied to us and broken his promises. Are we supposed to trust and believe him? That question doesn't have an answer because a lot of people, or different people, will have different points of view on that issue. But it does get them to consider what their own thoughts are and come up with their own point of view. Hopefully, one that's aligning with the author. And I'm sure that prior to this question, the author would have listed or given a number of reasons why they shouldn't trust this minister. So that's fresh in their mind, and then the question only reiterates that. I guess an example that we could use currently is the AFL. So, how many pay cuts will AFL players take before they walk? Again, doesn't have a particular answer because each AFL player is different and they have different wages and they have different bank accounts and all that kind of stuff. They have different circumstances. So there is no answer to that question, but it stops and makes the public think that if the AFL continues to not play games, how long will it take before AFL players? So figurative language, such as metaphors and similes, which you should have a pretty good understanding of, given that we've studied this in class and that you probably studied it in class last year, used to illustrate points and make comparisons between concepts that aren't normally linked or wouldn't normally be linked in any other situation. So the example on the screen, the concept is that the internet is not a very safe place, and the author uses a metaphor to really make that point. So the internet is the Wild West. It's unregulated, it's unpoliced, and it's unsafe for children. He's used the metaphor of the Wild West, so somewhere where cowboys and outlaws live, and he's used that imagery to make a link to the internet. So he's saying that the internet is really dangerous, particularly for children, because it's unregulated. It's not very well policed, and it can be really unsafe. It's unsafe. So he's suggesting that the internet is just as dangerous as the Wild West. He's using that imagery to illustrate his point and get the reader to agree with him or her. An anecdote is a short personal story that the author would talk about to add a bit more weight to their argument. So it's something that has occurred in their own life that shows the audience that what the author might be talking about has a real impact on people's lives. So you can see the example on the screen. I couldn't believe it. Zooming down along a suburban street, the driver was texting on his mobile phone, holding a cup of coffee in his other hand and steering with his knees. So the author is showing the reader that he can write as much, or people can write as much as they want about unsafe drivers. It's actually occurring in the real world, and this is a personal account of a moment in time when the author has actually seen it occur. Emotive language is the deliberate use of really strong or powerful words that provoke different types of emotions in the reader. So they could be words that provoke anger or sadness or guilt or joy or happiness. The examples on the screen, people all over the world are suffering because. So the use of the word suffering really evokes sadness. Or can they have so quickly forgotten Black Saturday? Or the senseless loss of life and the obliteration of whole communities that broke the collective heart of this nation. Words like senseless loss, the obliteration, collective heart of this nation, those types of words are much more powerful than just saying the destruction of whole communities have devastated this nation. Emotive language engages people's feelings, not logic or reason. So it's often trying to target the heart and not the head. If a writer manipulates a reader to feel a certain way, then the reader becomes more likely to agree with the writer's overall contention or point of view. An attack is a strong criticism or argument that is made against something, whether it be a person, a company, a government, maybe a politician. An attack will try and belittle the receiver and try and motivate the reader to join in their anger. So you can see the example here. Comments are a little more than adolescent gibberish. So you can see the type of language that author has used to belittle the woman in picture who has made some sort of comment, suggesting that her comments are as childish as teenagers. It mentions at the end that if used too often, it can alienate the audience. meaning that the audience might suggest or might think, oh, this argument is very biased because they're not providing another point of view, or they're not letting back on their argument or on their attack. It's becoming a little bit too one-sided. So the task that you'll be required to complete today asks you to read and annotate a newspaper article. So the first part of the task asks you to access the newspaper article using the link at the bottom of the slide. The second part of this task is to read the article in full, and you can annotate the article as you read if you wish. And then the third task, or the third part of this task, is using your OneNote. I want you to write down 6 persuasive techniques that you can find in the article. I first want you to write down the name of the persuasive technique. I then want you to copy and paste the persuasive technique from the article, and then justify your choice in a full sentence, or full sentences, or maybe 3. You can use persuasive techniques from this PowerPoint, or persuasive techniques that you've learned in Year 7. But I definitely want you to be using the persuasive techniques that we've studied while at school. So over the last 2 years, we're using those persuasive techniques. I've given you an example on the next slide of what an answer would look like. So a reminder that you're doing this 6 times for 6 different persuasive techniques that you can find in this newspaper article. So this is an example of one persuasive technique. So I found a rhetorical question when I was reading the article. It was right up the top of the article. And the rhetorical question was, what is it with people who keep these nasty dogs? So a reminder, a rhetorical question is a question being asked by the author that does not have an answer. It's just something to make you think. So my written explanation is, I have labelled this technique as a rhetorical question because while the question is impossible to answer, it makes the reader ponder why people would choose to purchase dogs that can be vicious or dangerous. It makes you think that if these dogs can potentially pose a threat to someone as innocent as a young child, are they worth breeding? So I'm sure you can see that in my response, I've got 2 sentences, okay, and I've turned it into a small paragraph. I would expect the same amount of detail from each and every one of you. Let's try and put a little bit of effort into our responses and show our understanding of persuasive techniques. That concludes this PowerPoint, but I will be available online if you have any questions. Thanks, guys.